I wrote a book called Explanations and Corrections in the Gospel of Luke. And in the book, I included attacks on the ancient interpretations, certain ancient interpreters, because people universally attribute false ideas to Jesus with regard to interpretation of the book of Daniel. What I mean is that people have been brainwashed with ideas from 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Josephus, Porphyry, and the early church fathers. Well, anyway, this is the second video on the interpretations of Josephus uh, that I'm making for YouTube based on one of my chapters. And in the first video, I ended up by using a comment by William Whiston, which acknowledged the mistakes in Wars of the Jews by Josephus. So I'm only going to focus on Antiquities of the Jews now. Josephus writes in Antiquities 10:11:7, he also wrote and left behind him what made manifest the accuracy and undeniable veracity of his predictions. For he saith that when he was in Susa, the metropolis of Persia, and went out into the field with his companions, there was on the sudden a motion and concussion of the earth, and that he was left alone by himself, his friends flying away from him, and that he was disturbed and fell on his face and on his two hands, and that a certain person touched him, and at the same time bade him rise and see what would befall his countrymen after many generations. In the quotation above, Josephus is beginning to relate the vision of the ram and the he-goat in Daniel 8, but he inserts the encounter Daniel had with an angel from chapter 10 as if Daniel 10:7-11 belonged at the beginning of chapter 8. Josephus continues to summarize Daniel 8. I will eliminate some of the text since it's long. And that God showed to him that it should fight against his nation and take their city by force and bring the temple worship to confusion and forbid the sacrifices to be offered for 1,296 days. Daniel wrote that he saw these visions in the plain of Susa, and he hath informed us that God interpreted the appearance of this vision after the following manner. And that from among them there should arise a certain king that should overcome our nation and their laws, and should take away their political government, and should spoil the temple, and forbid the sacrifices to be offered for 3 years' time. And indeed so it came to pass that our nation suffered these things under Antiochus Epiphanes, according to Daniel's vision, and what he wrote many years before they came to pass. In the very same manner, Daniel also wrote concerning the Roman government, and that our country should be made desolate by them. Daniel 8:14 says 2,300 days, or evenings and mornings, not 1,296 days, as Josephus said. I put that number in bold above. No ancient authority agrees with Josephus on his number. Suppose that Josephus had a more accurate copy of Daniel than the one preserved in the Masoretic text, and that the text really should read 1,296 days. Then he would be telling us that 1,296 days is 3 years, which is yet another false statement. And if you substitute 2,300 days for 1,296, it still isn't true. Nor is it true if you divide 2,300 evenings and mornings by 2 and get 1,150 days, as some have done. So Josephus's exposition of Daniel 8 does not manifest the accuracy and undeniable veracity of God's predictions, as he said. It subjects the book of Daniel to ridicule. And in a footnote, compared him to Hippolytus, who said something very similar. Josephus got most of Antiquities 12:7-6 from 1 Maccabees, but he inserted his own interpretations, which I have put in bold below. Josephus said, "Now it so fell out that these things were done on the very same day on which their divine worship had fallen off." He means the month and day, and was reduced to a profane and common use after 3 years' time, that is, to the day. For so it was that the temple was made desolate by Antiochus, and so continued for 3 years. This desolation happened to the temple in the 145th year, on the 25th day of the month Apelius, and on the 153rd Olympiad. But it was dedicated anew on the same day, the 25th of the month Apelius, on the 148th year, and on the 154th Olympiad. And this desolation came to pass according to the prophecy of Daniel, which was given 408 years before, for he declared that the Macedonians would dissolve that worship for some time. 1 Maccabees doesn't actually say 3 years, but gives the month, day, and year in both the defilement and the cleansing of the temple. Josephus must have calculated the 3 years from 1 Maccabees 154 and 1 Maccabees 4:59. It's impossible to determine his historical source in wars for the duration of the desolation of the temple. But his source in Antiquities is clear. Namely, he found it in 1 Maccabees, 3 years to the day. And whereas he didn't provide a biblical prophecy in wars to connect with the time period of the desolation of the temple, Josephus has one now. He says that it was the prophecy with the ram and the he-goat, the 8th chapter of Daniel, not the 7th, 9th, 11th, or 12th chapter. Notice that Josephus did say that this was a fulfillment of the prophecy of Daniel, but he didn't quote a passage from Daniel about a 3-year period. Josephus had said in Wars 5:9-4, "Our sanctuaries made desolate for 3 years and 6 months." Apparently Josephus rejected 3.5 years by the time he wrote Antiquities, changing it to 3 years, which he seems to have thought was 1,296 days. In summary, Josephus believed that the desolation of the temple at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes lasted exactly 3 years. He said that this 3-year period, 1,296 days, was predicted in the prophecy in Daniel 8. Therefore, he didn't think that the desolation of this temple in the 2nd century BC had anything to do with the other time periods in Daniel, the time and times and half a time of Daniel 7:25 and Daniel 12:7, the 1,290 days of Daniel 12:11, or the 1,335 days of Daniel 12:12. And I put in a footnote, this means that none of the hundreds of commentators who accommodated the time periods of Daniel to the times of Antiochus Epiphanes have any historical support either from Josephus or from 1st and 2nd Maccabees. But since 1,296 days is really more than 3 years, and since Josephus seems to have combined the 8th and 10th chapters of Daniel without authority, Josephus is so unreliable that he should have no influence on people studying the book of Daniel. Josephus' thinking about dates is illuminated by what he said in Wars 6:4-8 concerning the burning of the temple in Jerusalem. I will put part of it in bold type. Now, although anyone would justly lament the destruction of such a work as this was, since it was the most admirable of all the works that we have seen or heard of, both for its curious structure and its magnitude, and also for the vast wealth bestowed upon it, as well as for the glorious reputation it had for its holiness, yet might such a one comfort himself with this thought, that it was fate that decreed it so to be, which is inevitable both as to living creatures and as to works and places also. However, one cannot but wonder at the accuracy of this period thereto related, for the same month and day were now observed, as I said before, wherein the holy house was burnt formerly by the Babylonians. So he's talking about something else, but he's remarking about the coincidence caused by fate. Now, the number of years that passed from its first foundation, which was laid by King Solomon, till this destruction, which happened in the second year of the reign of Vespasian, are collected to be 1,130, besides 7 months and 15 days. And from the second building of it, which was done by Haggai, in the second year of Cyrus the king, till its destruction under Vespasian, there were 639 years and 45 days. Josephus didn't say that a prophet had predicted that the temple would be burned on the same day by the Romans on which it was previously burned by the Babylonians. He said that fate had decreed it, and that one could not but wonder at it. The authors of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, likewise, could not but wonder at the coincidence of dates. But even though they knew that it didn't fit the 2,300 evenings and mornings of Daniel 8, they thought that surely divine providence was behind the coincidence. Josephus says more about providence in Antiquities 10:11-7, and I will put part of it in bold type. The Epicureans are in error who cast providence out of human life and do not believe that God takes care of the affairs of the world, nor that the universe is governed and continued in being by that blessed and immortal nature, but say that the world is carried along of its own accord without a ruler and a curator, which, were it destitute of a guide to conduct, as they imagine, it would be like ships without pilots, which we see drowned by the winds, or like chariots without drivers, which are overturned. So would the world be dashed to pieces by its being carried without a providence, and so perish and come to naught. So that by the aforementioned predictions of Daniel, those men seem to me very much to err from the truth, who determine that God exercises no providence over human affairs. For if that were the case, that the world went on by mechanical necessity, we should not see that all things would come to pass according to his prophecy. Well, his comment is confused because he sometimes gives an inaccurate prophecy and other times he doesn't give a prophecy at all. But he's consistent, he believes in fate, and he's consistent, he believes in the coincidence of dates. 1st and 2nd Maccabees were inconsistent between each other, and Josephus was inconsistent with himself about the time period that the temple was desolate. They probably didn't think that the number of years was important. They thought that coincidences of dates were proof that God had restored the temple. In a quotation above, Josephus calculated periods of 1,130 years plus 7 months and 15 days, and also a period of 639 years and 45 days. He didn't say that a prophecy predicted those exact periods of time. The authors of 1st and 2nd Maccabees did not believe that Daniel had predicted the time periods under discussion. Because of his confused and contradictory statements, it's hard to be sure exactly what Josephus thought. It's surprising that Josephus was so confused about the time period of the desolation of the temple, because he had presumably heard the services at the festival of dedication numerous times. As a priest, he shouldn't have misquoted the book of Daniel so badly.